Welcome to another episode of Fill in the Blank Podcast. I'm joined with the companion of days,
Arigato.
Evan. So, Evan, you already kind of hinted at what we were talking about, but what do you know about Masaji Kitano?
He's Japanese.
Really? He's not Chinese or anything?
No.
Okay. How do you know?
The name.
Okay. Well, what do you mean the name gives it away? How can you distinguish Japanese between Chinese from the name?
You just can. Like, Ano is a Japanese name. Chinese is a different...
That's like trying to prove, is Scientology real? And you're like, it just is.
Well, it's...
Where's your facts, Tom Cruise? Okay.
I guess I don't have the facts. It's more,
Statement.
It's more contextual.
All right, let's move on. Jesus. So, second in command of Unit 731 was Masaji Kitano. So Masaji Kitano was actually a medical doctor, microbiologist, and a lieutenant general in the Imperial Japanese Army. He was the second commander of Unit 731, a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit responsible for some of the most notorious war crimes carried out by Japanese personnel. Do you know anything about Unit 731?
I do not.
Okay, well, Unit 731 actually worked with human experiments and also germ experiments. They were the ones that also, the one podcast we did, Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night, that was led by that main commander, Shiroishi.
Oh, shit.
Now, those were the ones that, bombing of San Diego. That's what they were going to do.
With all the...
infected fleas
yes.
and all that, yes. So, they were actually, they were a lot worse than the Nazis, in my opinion. It was led by Dr. Shiro Ishii of Unit 731, bred plague microbes and deliberately infected thousands of men, women, and children. It conducted vivisections and frostbite and air pressure experiments, transfused prisoners with horse blood, and studied the effect of weapons on the body, among many things.
Vivisections are fucking...
Yeah. The Japanese killed an estimated 10,000 people at Unit 731. Most of the victims were Chinese, Mongolians, and Koreans. They included children who wandered too close to the facility and a teenage girl found carrying a gun. Experiments were also performed on captured Soviets and British. Human guinea pigs at Unit 731 were referred to as logs. They were brought to the laboratory in black vans known as Vornki, or ravens. Residents of Harbin remember the vans racing through streets as the prisoners inside pounded and shouted for help. Once in the prison, they were often fattened up to ensure good results. One elderly resident of Harbin told the Japan Times they would catch people surreptitiously and bring them to their laboratory. Local residents were afraid every day they might be kidnapped by the Japanese. Before going outside, I had to stop and think, are there Japanese around? So Unit 731, these people were pretty bad, and they were actually called the biological, I think it was like the Biological Medical Services of Japan or something like that. They had a really weird name. No, it was like the Human Department of something, like it just sanitation. It was something ridiculous.
God.
Like the way they said it was like sanitation. It's like, oh, you're talking about cleaning up people. Like you're talking about literally like taking people, and like that's your definition of exterminating these things. Well, Unit 731, they did, a magnitude of experiments. And the one thing that I found out, because there's not a lot of information on Masaji Kitano, so I had to go into many different articles. He was basically the leader of the experiments of a lot of the vivisections and stuff because of his medical prevalence. So he was one of the... They had about 59 surgeons. I think they had a total of like 3,000 people working there. And there was only like a total of 3,000 something people that were recorded dead out of like 10,000 people that showed up. But anybody that went through the gates of the camps, and the camps were split into 4 different districts. One, they all covered different things. One covered like germ warfare. One was where all the research materials were kept. One was where all the biological stuff was kept. And then a lot was where the experimentation would happen. So let's talk about Masaji Kitano. So Masaji Kitano graduated from the School of Medicine in Tokyo Imperial University in 1919 with a medical degree. In 1922, he was commissioned as a lieutenant as an army surgeon. In 1932, he worked to the first army hospital in Tokyo. He later left the hospital service, transferring to the Army Surgeon School in 1936. He was dispatched to Manchukuo, an annexed part of the Empire of Japan, and became a professor at the Manchu School of Medicine teaching microbiology. In 1942, he was appointed the second commander of Unit 731. His predecessor was Shiroishi. In April 1945, he was promoted to Lieutenant Surgeon General and appointed commander of the 13th Army Medical Corps. After the Japanese surrender in August 1945, he was detained in a POW camp in Shanghai. Like all involved with Unit 731 or Japanese biological warfare, he was reparated to Japan in January 1946. So the reason why a lot of like what happened with Operation Paperclip, where we didn't condemn any of this, a lot of the scientists that were involved there, was because they gave us a lot of nuclear research. So that we gave them pardon for us basically taking their research notes. Now this actually happened with Masaji Kitano and a bunch of other people that were involved in Unit 731 during the Kosher Vet Trials, which is a Soviet-Russian, it was really an excuse because Russia was like, they killed Soviets. We need them to pay. Like, there's no giving them pardon. There's nothing for research. We don't care because they were angry. And America's like, all right, we'll do the Kosher Vet Trials. So they did this thing called the Kosher Vet Trials. And it's basically like they only condemned like 30 out of hundreds of other surgeons and all these medical professionals that worked for Unit 731 that were doing these terrible experiments. And Masaji Kitano was one that did not get punished. And actually, he was extradited back to Japan. And upon turning into Japan, even that, they were like, no, like, we don't even want this guy here. Like, those people are freaking nuts. And this is like known as, Unit 731 is known as Japan's little secret. Like, they were like, this is really bad stuff we didn't want out, and we don't admit to it at all. And the only reason any of the information came out on Unit 731 was actually because the school of medicine that they all graduated from, Tokyo Imperial University, decided to release this information. After these trials, everyone was to swear on their life that they would never mention anything that happened at Unit 731. America had a rule and a trade agreement with these people to let them know, like, hey, this is it. We're trading for research right now. You're getting pardoned. Do not mention any of this to anybody. Don't tell your family members. Don't tell anyone, or there's going to be consequences. This cannot get out. This is America's little mess up that somehow got leaked based on confidential evidence and people going back to the university to look at these people's medical records that work there. Because most of the surgeons and most of the medical professionals in Unit 731 belong to this School of Medicine in Tokyo Imperial University. So it was like, that's a weird coincidence, you know what I mean? Like, they specifically picked out this whole university, and someone came out was like, you need to come out and be honest about these people that were there. Like, you need to give this information out. Like, don't hide it. That's got a toll on your conscience. So playing like a moral value type deal. And they decided like, yeah, you're right, we'll release some of the information. And they did. And this was like in 2005, I think. So, I mean, it's ridiculous to think that, first of all, my main question is, how can we be so willing to forgive people for these horrible experiments that we're going to get to? I'm going to explain them to you, and it's going to bring your mood down a little bit. It's because it's pretty rough stuff. Compared to the Nazis, you think Nazis are the worst people in the world. Nah, this is like crazy. But Unit 731, everyone kind of getting off after just doing the most horrendous things that you couldn't even imagine, man. And all for just the word of research for war purposes. It's a lot to take in, dude.
It'd be nice to think that people in the positions of power where they are, who are being pressured by their government to do this kind of thing, it'd be nice to think that you have to be a monster to do something like that. But that's simply not how human beings operate.
You wouldn't think
like
that we'd be
humans were fine with slaves.
Well, you see,
relatively recently in human history,
when it comes to torture, it seems like the more where torture happens is in a place that the people don't really look like the people that are torturing. It seems to be like if they don't look like us, it makes it easier for us to torture them or experiment on them. But the weird thing is, where they were experimenting on Soviets, Mongolians, and all this stuff, they still kind of look very similar, at least to us, on how They and that's not being racist, that's being true. Like Japanese and Chinese people, they look similar, but when it comes to like how America has experimented on Guatemalans and other people of different races, is because they don't really look like us in that way. Like a white person experimenting on a Guatemalan person, there's no similarities really in their skin color and their looks at all, so it makes it easier and takes the stigma off in our eyes. Even though
It would be going forward in this. I just like to say that it would be nice if you had to be a monster to conform to your imperialistic government and do these kinds of experiments and horrible research like for them. Like we'd be looking at a very different human race if that were the case.
So after he came back to Japan, he worked for the Green Cross, a Japanese pharmaceutical company. In 1959, he became head of the plant in Tokyo and the chief director of that company. He was a chief funeral commissioner of Shiroishi, a fellow unit of 731 member. So Kitano actually died in Tokyo in 1986, even though there are conspiracy theories that say he's still alive today, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense considering he was born in 1894, but that's the whole thing about conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
So some of the actual notes I wrote down after doing a little bit of research after the end of this article is the Green Cross of Japan, that was founded by original members of Unit 731, had a scandal in 1980 that led to 3,000 people contracting HIV through the distribution and use of blood products that were known to be unsafe. So this guy, Masaji Kitano, that was used in biological experimentation in Unit 731, starts a blood bank type thing called the Green Cross in Japan, started the company, and then infected 3,000 people with HIV through a method that was known to be unsafe. So it was his intention. Do you think that it was his intention? Because he was using methods that were known that could contract HIV. He was like, we'll just do it anyway. I seem like after being in Unit 731, he probably was dumbed down to the looks or the lives of other people, where he was like, it's an unsafe method, but if they get HIV, they get HIV.
Once you are that high up and have control over such a dehumanizing like project, just working on people as though they're cattle and not individual human beings, like I imagine that takes a heavy toll on the way that you view human life.
Well, Unit 731 was involved in many research on more than 20 types of bacteria, including anthrax and smallpox. 3,000 were known to have died from human experimentation. Much of the information is still unreleased of the horrendous acts because of the U.S. giving pardons to scientists in turn for research. So some of the human experiments that have actually been released and information we're able to know about is prisoners at Unit 731 were frozen to death, burned alive, dissected alive without anesthetic, shot, electrocuted, injected with animal blood, boiled, and hung upside down until they were dead. Some were sealed inside pressure chambers that caused their eyes to pop out of their heads. Operations were performed on perfectly healthy prisoners accused of being spies to teach young doctors surgical techniques. Describing his work, one scientist in the plague unit at 731 later said, I inserted the scalpel directly into the log's neck. Log is a term for people. And opened the chest. At first there was a terrible scream, but the voice soon fell silent. One employee at Unit 731, not directly involved in the experiments, told Newsweek, from the start we were taught not to see, not to inquire, not to speak. Explaining why we cut out the eyes of victims, one Japanese worker said, I received an order. So another one says, there were reports of 3-year-old children being jabbed with needles and submerged in icy water, and screaming women cut open so their reproductive organs could be examined. Some victims had their stomachs removed and their esophagus connected to intestines. Others who had their arms amputated and reattached on opposite sides. In one experiment, a victim was taken outside when the temperatures were negative 40 degrees Celsius and tied to a post. Water was poured on the lower arm until it froze solid. The doctors then tested their frostbite treatment and lower arm was amputated. The same process was repeated on the upper arms and then the legs. When the victim was reduced to a head and torso, he was then turned over to disease divisions for experiments there. Now, Nazis. Not as bad now that you look at Unit 731, am I right? Still messed up, but Unit 731 kind of takes the icing off the cake.
It's hard to think of something to say.
There's not really much to say, dude, to be 100% honest with you. I didn't expect you to have a lot of thoughts on this because I just wanted to make you aware that there are people out there that tend to look at other people's lives with no meaning. And it's hard to think that where we hold life so dear, some people do, some people are totally disregarded of it or so drawn to just following orders, where I have a real problem with people a lot of the time that they focus on, that's what I had to do. That's what I was told to do. That's what I was told. It's like, are you going to be a mindless drone your whole life? When are you going to take control and kind of have your own thoughts? If you notice people that follow the news, you're just getting droned on information that's none of your thoughts of your own. They're all thoughts of someone else. You need to focus on your own stuff.
Forming your own opinions is
it's what makes us individuals.
Yeah, it's the cornerstone of critical thinking. Critical thinking has been the focus on critical thinking is way less than it used to be in our society. It's kind of scary.
Yeah. Well, that was just the human experiments. Do you know anything about the germ experiments at Unit 731?
No.
Are you scared to find out?
A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Prisoners at Unit 731 were infected with the bubonic plague, syphilis, cholera, typhoid, anthrax, and a variety of other viruses. Bacteria and diseases, an estimated 10,000 prisoners died from these experiments. Similar experiments were conducted at Unit 8604 at Zolsgan University near Canton, where perhaps 20,000 people previously thought to have died from starvation may have actually died from infections, diseases planted on them by scientists, and a few details are known. But bodies buried in earthen jars have been discovered, and local residents saw large numbers of bodies dumped in pits and destroyed in vats of chemicals. As many as 250,000 people died in field tests of germ agents and biological weapons on the building site of Harbin Bioweapon Facility in Beijing, Dalian, and Nanjing. More than 300 people died when cholera germs were sprayed on Beijing. People also died from ingesting food purposely infected with cholera. So they also tested the prisoners at lunchtime when they would be given food. Besides dropping plague bombs on China, Unit 731 did massive experiments. So Unit 731 after World War II. As the Nazis did at Auschwitz, the Japanese burned Unit 731 facilities in an effort to destroy evidence of the atrocities committed there. Unit 731 remained a secret until the 1980s when it was uncovered by a Japanese journalist. The scientists who performed the experiments were given salaries and immunity from war crimes by the Americans in a Faustian bargain for the results of their experiments. Ishii, sometimes regarded as the Japanese Dr. Mengele, lived until 1959 when he died of cancer. After World War II, many of the doctors who worked at Unit 731 took on positions at hospitals, medical schools, and pharmaceutical companies in Japan. One Japanese historian said the doctors have little remorse and many were disappointed when the war ended because they could not continue their research. The U.S. recruited Japanese germ warfare scientists for programs to the U.S. One even became a member of the New York Academy of Sciences. So, according to one Japanese scholar, the U.S. still possesses 600 pages of documents and possibly human tissue samples for Unit 731. Medical schools in Japan still have slides of fresh human brains made from victims at Unit 731. And it's crazy to think that our culpability in all this is we gave them pardon just for research. And we've done this before with Operation Paperclip, Warner von Braun. Like, you help us expand our space research, we'll forgive you for your Nazi crimes. Same thing, Unit 731. You give us your biological information, we'll forgive you and give you a little bit of money to get on your way. Move on with your life. A lot of them are like, it kind of sucks the war ended because I couldn't continue my research. Those people should have been trialed and definitely handled more properly. I think if you don't have any remorse for the situation of what you did to these people, you shouldn't be able to go free at all. I think if there's people that were like, I was just following orders, be like, all right, yeah, okay, we'll give you a break on this one if you give us some of the research. That's understandable if you have to do that. I don't believe any of them should have got off. They all should have paid for something. But it's hard to think, like, you look at both perspectives.
Can't prove intent.
Yeah. So some testimonies from actually some of the participants shed some light about parts of the experiments. An anonymous medical assistant described in a 1995 New York Times interview his first vivisection. The fellow knew that it was over for him, and so he didn't struggle. When they led him into the room and tied him down, but when I picked up the scalpel, that's when he began screaming. I cut him open from the chest to the stomach, and he screamed terribly, and his face was all twisted in agony. He made this unimaginable sound and was screaming so horribly, but then he finally stopped. This was all in a day's work for surgeons, but it really left an impression on me because it was my first time. The unit was not only infamous for its vivisection. Some prisoners sent to Unit 731 were taken outside and tied to stakes. The Japanese would then test new biological weapons such as plague cultures or bombs filled with plague-infested fleas on them. It's nuts, man, because Masaji Kitano, being second in command of Unit 731, you got to think, he was, idolizing Hiroishi, the main guy that was the captain of the whole entire place. And he it's hard to think that he looked at that guy as a god, and then after he died, he was like, I'm going to try and create his work and like keep it going, keep it alive. Like, I wouldn't want to do anything like this. I'm sorry, but like, if I was scared for my life, if the main guy died and I became second in command, I would have ended the program immediately. I'm pretty sure you would have too. But it's hard to think, like, were they just so blind because they were ignorant to what we know about humans, or were they just trying to do anything to get the research they needed?
It's a combination. It's like a power play, and it's a nuanced mix, because it's like a horrible scare tactic that make your enemies terrified of you, but they also get biological and
we talked about it before, where they tried to launch a nuclear weapon at the moon just to test how strong we were.
Yeah.
So how far are we willing to break the laws of what we can, of our moral values? Like, where do we draw the line when it comes to war? It seems like there isn't really one.
I think we've entered a new age since nuclear weaponry has been introduced, because I don't personally believe a World War III will be happening. I think, I hope, at the very least. I really don't think anyone in a position to start like a nuclear cascade would do it. I don't think anyone would ever actually do it, because it'd be so foolish. I think, in its own way, the, mutually assured destruction might end this kind of thing.
It's just crazy when you look at how far someone can really demoralize a human life. You know what I mean?
That's how society is measured in the value of a unimportant human life. And, like, especially people who are below you.
Well, to end this, to end this with a quote of my favorite game, war never changes. Thanks everyone for listening to this episode of Fill in the Blank. Sorry if it was a little bit depressing, but this is a real thing and it's part of our history and we need to know it. It's Unit 731. Anybody want to look up this information? Some of the pictures are pretty terrible, so if you're too sensitive for information and too sensitive to blood and gore, I wouldn't be looking at a lot of the Unit 731 photos. But thank you for listening to this episode and stay tuned for our next episode.